This little film is all about the funicular railways in Hastings. Yes, there are two. Many people don't realise that because one of them, the West Hill Railway, is well hidden. When I started this project, I feared for the future of these buildings, like I do with all historic buildings really. But it turns out, rather fortunately, that these railways do make a decent profit for the council, so their future is reasonably well secured depending on the amount of maintenance it costs to keep them going. But let's start at the beginning. On the 21st of March, which was a Saturday in 1891, in the Hastings Observer, it was proudly announced the opening of the Hastings lift by Mr. Wilson Noble MP on the West Hill on Wednesday next at 1:30. After the ceremony, it will be open to the public, the fare being 1 penny. A big picture appeared in the paper as the lift was opened, and 50 or 60 people, including the mayor and mayoress, turned up for the shindig. It was described as being 500 feet from platform to platform and rising nearly 170 feet. There is a station with booking office and electrical communication. The tunnel is 402 feet long, 19 feet wide and 18 feet high, with heavy counterforts at short intervals, and there are 2 lines of rails with a gauge of 6 feet. A large crowd assembled at either end to witness the opening, about 50 ticket holders being admitted upon the George Street platform, and it was announced that about 1.75 million bricks were used and 16,000 tonnes of earth and rock had been removed. The machinery at the top alone weighs about 18 tonnes, and the carriages, which weigh about 4 tonnes each, were built by a Midland Carriage Company in Birmingham. Now, this is, as far as I understand it, the only existing funicular railway that has a tunnel for most of its length. All the others that still exist are open to everything and the elements included. Apparently, even Queen Victoria chucked 20 guineas into the build. At this point, it might be worth telling you what a funicular railway is, or at least how it's described. It comes from the Latin funicular, meaning string, and it's a system whereby 2 cars, if you like, are attached together by cables. Now, most of them originally had big water tanks underneath them, so that effectively the car that was coming down would pull the car that was going up. They had to adjust the water levels in them initially to make sure that they didn't run out of control. But in its simplest form, that's how it works. It's a very lavish lunch afterwards. Mr. Noble, the MP, talked about how great it was that they'd have it, and also about how much money they'd made at other places like Scarborough, which has had the very first funicular railway in the UK, and they'd obviously made a lot of money. Unfortunately, this particular funicular railway started off with a bigger disadvantage. Before we go into that though, it's probably worth mentioning some of the courses on the menu. They had potage, consommé à la royale, they had ballotines of chicken, lobster salad, mayonnaise of salmon, chicken à Richelieu, salmon à la Norwegian, pressed beef, pigeon pie, braised game. They didn't stint themselves at all at this meal, did they? At the feast, Mr. Councillor Stubbs proposed a toast to the success of the lift company, and said that he was pleased to see that their hard labours had now come to a satisfactory climax as far as the completion of the work was concerned. The only thing to be done now was to keep the infare in working order and get the customers to come and avail themselves of the use of the lift. Costs had actually risen from £10,000 to £16,000, partly probably because of the building work involved. Anyway, this was in 1891. By 1894, the lift company had gone bankrupt. Fortunately, a new lift company came in and was prepared to run it, which they did, to the extent that after the East Hill had its own lift, it was a letter sent to the editor of the Hastings Observer which said, "Sirs, I notice that an accident is reported as having taken place at the Hastings lift. As this may be misleading, I shall be glad if you will give publicity to the fact that no such accident has taken place at the West Hill lift, which for a number of years was the only public lift in Hastings, and is consequently often referred to as the Hastings lift. This lift though, since its opening in 1891, has carried over 2.5 million persons without accident, and indeed such an accident as described would be impossible at the West Hill lift owing to the principles on which it is constructed. Yours truly, J.E. Ray, Secretary. That was one in the eye for the East Hill Company, of which accident we will talk later. In June 1912 there was a daring raid on the lift. The smart early morning capture of an alleged thief on the West Hill was described in the Hastings Police Court on Wednesday before Alderman Mayor S.T. Weston and Alderman A.W. Chesterfield. John Smith, painter, was charged with breaking and entering the West Hill lift's premises and stealing 1 shilling and sixpence in money belonging to William Chambers, and also a pair of opera glasses, the property of Arthur Chapman Gregory. P.C. Terrell said that about 3 o'clock that morning he was on the West Hill near the lift when, on approaching the entrance close to the automatic machines, he saw the prisoner dart from the top of the steps and secrete himself behind one of these machines. I ran after him, said the constable, caught hold of him and said, "What are you doing there?" He replied, "It's all right, governor, it's a fair cop." I filmed the lift going up with 2 cameras, one at the front and one at the rear, and coming down the same way. Now we're off to the Funicular Railway on the East Hill, which is in Rockernor Road. Quick walk coming up. On the 9th of August 1902, a big event took place. Yes, in London at Westminster Abbey, it was the coronation of Edward VII and his wife Alexandra as King and Queen of the United Kingdom. In a much smaller affair in Hastings, the East Hill Funicular Railway was opened without much fuss or fanfare. Actually, the launch itself was not a huge success because the lift actually broke down in the afternoon, which meant that only 1,000 passengers were able to take part in the going up and down of the lift. Within a month of the lift opening, a serious accident took place on the 23rd of September. Owing to some mishap making the downward trip, one of the cars ran off the metals when 3/4 of the way down and crashed with great force into another car, which was in a stationary position. A dozen passengers, a number of whom were children, sustained injuries of some sort, chiefly bruises and cuts. So no real harm was done. In the first 3 months, they reckon to have had 40,000 passengers, which was quite incredible. The East Hill is actually got the steepest funicular railway in the whole of the UK. So like the West Hill, it has something special about it that none of the other funicular railways have, which is always a good thing. Various events took place there, and I'm going to tell you about 1 or 2 of them. In 1929, the borough engineer informed the council that because they were relying on water levels, it was going to be impossible to keep the lifts running during July and August unless they fitted pumps. So it was agreed that they would fit pumps, and the problem was therefore resolved, because even then the lifts were what you might call a nice little earner. One mysterious incident occurred in September 1930 when a tragic discovery was made at the lowest station of the East Hill lift. The body of a senior attendant there was found in one of the water tanks, drowned. His wife had given evidence to the court that he was very happy the day before and had eaten a good breakfast, the implication being that he may have killed himself. The court, however, delivered an open verdict as there was no real evidence either way. So we'll never know what did happen. We have a Hastings financial report suggesting that in the 2018-2019, 103,000 East Hill Cliff Railway users and 98,000 West Hill Cliff Railway users, showing that the popularity is still there. At that point, it was predicted that the costs associated with running the lifts would be in the order of £287,782, but the income would be £432,472, leaving a positive balance of just under 145,000. They adjusted those figures, which still left a profit just under 100,000. So it does look like the future seems to be quite positive and satisfactory for the enterprise, and people will be able to use these lifts far into the future. But as with all these things, you know, some serious maintenance issues could turn up, or other penny pinching could happen, and then we walk into a whole different ball game. Let's hope not, though. To have something that both these lifts are well over 100 years old now, and it's just a phenomenal thing to have on your doorstep. It's just so interesting, and the views, look at those views, they're just really, really lovely. And I like to use them myself as well. And if you haven't, you should go and give it a go, because they really are worthwhile. Well, that's all for me for the moment. Thank you very much for watching and listening.